Mick Schumacher. Mick Schumacher sits in the Haas garage after another pointless race, watching his championship dreams evaporate like morning mist, carrying the weight of the most legendary name in Formula One history, while driving a car that handles like a shopping trolley and the aerodynamics of a brick. The kid was supposed to be the second coming, the heir to Michael's throne, who would restore the Schumacher name to its rightful place at the top of the podium, and his junior career looked promising enough to justify the hype with an F2 championship and steady progression through the lower formulas. But Formula One doesn't care about your last name or your genetic heritage, and Mick discovered that driving talent isn't hereditary when he spent 2 seasons proving that even perfect technique can't overcome a fundamentally broken race car. His time at Haas became a masterclass in how to destroy a promising career through poor timing and worse equipment, with every race weekend serving as another reminder that being Michael Schumacher's son gets you attention but doesn't guarantee you speed. When Ferrari finally cut him loose from their academy program, it wasn't just the end of his F1 career, it was the death of a dynasty that had defined German motorsport for 2 decades. Nikita Mazepin became the most hated driver on the grid before he completed a full season, which is quite an achievement, considering F1's rich history of controversial personalities. And his career ended not because of his driving, but because his father's business connections became politically inconvenient when Russia decided to invade Ukraine. Mazepin's reputation was poisoned before he ever reached F1 through a combination of junior category incidents and social media controversies that made him a lightning rod for criticism. But underneath the negative publicity was a genuinely quick driver who had won races and championships in competitive junior series. His year at Haas became a public relations nightmare where every mistake was magnified and every controversy was dissected by fans who had already decided he didn't belong in F1. The geopolitical circumstances that ended his career were completely beyond his control, but they also provided a convenient excuse for a sport that had never really wanted him in the first place to remove a problem they couldn't solve through normal sporting channels. His departure from F1 represented the end of what could have been a redemption story, where a controversial figure proved his critics wrong through performance on track, but instead became another example of how external factors can destroy careers regardless of talent or potential. Stoffel Vandoorne dominated GP2 so completely in his rookie season that people started comparing him to Lewis Hamilton. And then he spent 3 years at McLaren, proving that individual brilliance means nothing when your car is powered by what appears to be a hairdryer, and the aerodynamics package was designed by someone who learned physics from cartoon shows. Vandoorne's GP2 title campaign was the kind of performance that makes team principals wake up in the middle of the night, checking their bank accounts, winning the championship with races to spare while making his competitors look like they were driving through molasses. And McLaren snapped him up as their golden boy who would lead them back to championship glory. But the McLaren-Honda era was a special kind of automotive torture, where promising drivers went to have their souls crushed by mechanical failures and lap times that would have been embarrassing in Formula 3. His partnership with Fernando Alonso became a masterclass in how to break a young driver's confidence, because sharing a garage with one of the greatest talents in F1 history while driving an uncompetitive car is like trying to prove your cooking skills by preparing a gourmet meal with ingredients you found in a dumpster. When McLaren finally showed him the door, Vandoorne had to watch from the outside as they suddenly became competitive again, which is the kind of timing that makes you question whether the universe has a personal vendetta against your career. Jean-Éric Vergne spent 4 years as Red Bull's unwanted stepchild, the talented driver who could never quite convince Helmut Marko that he deserved promotion to the main team, while watching less gifted drivers get handed opportunities that should have been his by right. Vergne had the speed and racecraft to succeed at the highest level, regularly outperforming teammates and extracting maximum performance from cars that had no business scoring points. But Red Bull's driver program operates like a medieval court, where politics matter more than performance, and Vergne never learned how to play the game correctly. His time at Toro Rosso became an exercise in frustration as he consistently delivered strong results, only to watch the team promote other drivers or bring in new prospects, while treating him like expensive furniture they couldn't quite bring themselves to throw away. The irony is that after F1 discarded him, Vergne went on to become a multiple Formula E champion and one of the most successful drivers in that series, proving that his talent was never in question, just his timing and team selection. His post-F1 success serves as a reminder that sometimes the sport's loss is another category's gain, and that measuring driver worth purely by F1 achievements ignores the broader spectrum of motorsport excellence. Jules Bianchi died at Suzuka in 2014 after 9 months in a coma, and his death represented not just the loss of a promising young driver, but the end of what could have been Ferrari's next great French champion, and a reminder that Formula One's relationship with danger is never more than one corner away from tragedy. Bianchi was the real deal, a Ferrari Academy graduate with the kind of natural speed and racecraft that made team principals start planning championship campaigns around his future development, and his performances for backmarker Marussia were consistently impressive enough to suggest that he could have been a genuine contender given competitive machinery. His family connections to motorsport royalty through his grandfather's racing career and his own obvious talent made him the kind of driver that Ferrari builds their long-term strategies around. The accident that killed him happened during a rescue operation in wet conditions, the kind of freak occurrence that highlights how the sport's safety improvements can never completely eliminate the fundamental risks of racing at 300 kilometers per hour on tracks where barriers and recovery vehicles create unavoidable hazards. His death led to significant safety improvements in F1, but it also robbed the sport of a driver who might have become one of the greats, leaving behind nothing but speculation about what could have been, and a tragic reminder that talent alone isn't enough to guarantee survival in a sport where death is always lurking in the margins. Daniil Kvyat won a race for AlphaTauri and celebrated like he'd just discovered the cure for cancer, because after being demoted, promoted, demoted again, and generally treated like Red Bull's emotional support driver, even a single victory felt like vindication for years of psychological warfare disguised as career development. Kvyat's time in the Red Bull ecosystem became a case study in how to systematically destroy a driver's confidence through inconsistent messaging and constant uncertainty about his future, with team management treating him like an expendable asset they could shuffle around whenever they needed to accommodate the latest wonder kid from their junior program. His initial promotion to Red Bull came at the expense of multiple race winner Daniil Ricciardo, which should have been his moment to establish himself as a legitimate championship contender, but instead became the beginning of a carousel ride that never seemed to end. The brutal irony is that Kvyat actually had the talent to succeed at the highest level, as evidenced by his race win and multiple podium finishes, but Red Bull's constant second-guessing and willingness to sacrifice him for short-term political gains meant he never got the stability necessary to develop into the driver he could have become. His eventual departure from F1 fell to Antonio Giovinazzi. Antonio Giovinazzi spent 3 years at Alfa Romeo, proving that being Ferrari's golden boy means nothing when your car is sponsored by a company that makes pasta sauce, and your teammate is a former world champion who treats every race weekend like his personal therapy session for working through retirement anxiety. Giovinazzi had the credentials to succeed in F1, with strong performances in junior categories and the backing of Ferrari's Academy program. But his time at Alfa Romeo became an exercise in managing expectations while driving a car that seemed designed by committee and built by the lowest bidder. His partnership with Kimi Räikkönen was supposed to be a learning experience where the veteran would mentor the rookie, but instead it became a study in contrasts between old-school professionalism and modern driver development failure. The problem with Giovinazzi wasn't his speed or racecraft, both of which were clearly adequate for F1 competition, but rather his inability to extract consistent performance from machinery that seemed to have different handling characteristics from weekend to weekend. His occasional flashes of brilliance were always undermined by inexplicable mistakes or mechanical failures that made it impossible to build momentum or establish himself as a reliable point scorer. And when Alfa Romeo finally decided they needed a change, his departure felt more like a mercy killing than a shocking career development. Pascal Wehrlein Pascal Wehrlein was Mercedes' chosen one, who got to drive their F1 car exactly never, because apparently winning the DTM championship and being backed by one of the most successful teams in motorsport history isn't enough to overcome the politics of modern Formula One, where talent takes a backseat to marketing budgets and passport colours. Wehrlein's junior career progression through Mercedes' development program should have guaranteed him a seat at the factory team, but instead he found himself bouncing between Manor and Sauber while watching less accomplished drivers get handed opportunities that should have been his by right of performance and team loyalty. His DTM championship wasn't just a title, it was a statement that he could handle pressure and deliver results when it mattered. But F1 teams treated it like an interesting footnote rather than proof of his capabilities. The cruel irony is that Wehrlein actually performed well when given the chance, regularly outperforming his machinery and scoring points for teams that had no business being competitive. But his lack of financial backing and unfortunate timing meant he was always fighting for scraps, while less talented but better connected drivers secured long-term contracts. His departure from F1 after just 2 seasons felt like a waste of genuine talent. Another reminder that the sport's current economic model prioritizes money over merit and leaves genuinely gifted drivers watching from the sidelines. Nyck de Vries. Nyck de Vries went from substitute driver hero to unemployed has been in exactly 10 races, which might be some kind of record for how quickly you can destroy a reputation that took 15 years to build through junior Formula success and multiple championship titles. De Vries was the complete package on paper: Formula 2 champion, Formula E champion, endurance racing winner, the kind of well-rounded talent that should have been snapped up by every team on the grid. And his substitute drive for Williams at Monza, where he scored points on debut, seemed to prove that he belonged at the highest level. But AlphaTauri gave him a seat, and discovered that being fast in other categories doesn't automatically translate to F1 success, especially when you're driving for a team that treats driver development like an expensive hobby they can't quite afford. His 10-race stint became a case study in how modern F1 teams have zero patience for adaptation periods, with every weekend bringing fresh speculation about his replacement, and every mistake magnified by the microscope of social media analysis. When they finally dropped him mid-season, it wasn't just the end of his F1 dream. It was a brutal reminder that in the current era of Formula One, you get one chance to prove yourself, and if you can't deliver immediately, there's always another junior champion waiting in the wings to take your seat. Nicholas Latifi. Nicholas Latifi spent 3 years at Williams, proving that having a billionaire father doesn't automatically make you fast, but it does guarantee you job security in a sport where most drivers are one bad weekend away from unemployment and financial ruin. Latifi's F1 career became a study in the uncomfortable relationship between talent and funding in modern motorsport, where his obvious limitations as a driver were constantly weighed against his financial contributions to a team that desperately needed his family's investment to remain competitive. His junior career had shown flashes of genuine speed, including race wins in F2, but F1 exposed the gap between being good enough to win races in junior categories and being good enough to compete with the world's best drivers. The tragedy of Latifi's career wasn't that he was slow, it was that he was competent enough to deserve respect, but never quite good enough to silence the critics who dismissed him as nothing more than a pay driver who had bought his way into F1. His final season became a countdown to inevitable replacement, with every mistake treated as confirmation of his inadequacy, and every decent performance dismissed as an anomaly. And when Williams finally found better financial backing elsewhere, his departure felt more like relief than disappointment. Scott Speed. Scott Speed carried the hopes of an entire nation when he became the first American to race in Formula One in over a decade, and then spent 2 seasons at Toro Rosso, proving that patriotic enthusiasm can't overcome fundamental limitations in racecraft and adaptability to European racing standards. Speed's arrival in F1 was supposed to be the beginning of an American renaissance in Grand Prix racing, with Red Bull betting that his success in junior categories would translate to F1 competitiveness and open up the lucrative American market for their energy drink empire. His junior career had shown promise, with victories in competitive series and the kind of aggressive driving style that American fans could relate to, but F1 exposed gaps in his racecraft that couldn't be overcome through determination alone. His time at Toro Rosso became a painful lesson in how different F1 is from other forms of motorsport, where split-second decision-making and adaptability matter more than raw speed, and where the margin for error is so small that even minor mistakes can destroy an entire weekend's work. When Red Bull finally moved him aside for other prospects, it wasn't just the end of his F1 career, but also the end of American hopes for a competitive driver in the sport's premier category. Robin Frijns. Robin Frijns never got his Formula One chance, despite being one of the most naturally gifted drivers of his generation, which proves that sometimes the sport's loss is motorsport's gain, because he went on to become a multiple champion in other categories, while F1 missed out on genuine talent. Frijns dominated Formula Renault 3.5 with the kind of authority that usually guarantees F1 progression, but his lack of significant financial backing and unfortunate timing meant he was always competing for seats with drivers who brought more money or political connections to the table. His performances in the junior categories weren't just impressive, they were dominant, with race wins and championship success that should have made every F1 team manager take notice. The irony is that while F1 passed him by, Frijns went on to prove his worth in other categories, becoming a race winner in Formula E and a consistent frontrunner in endurance racing, demonstrating that his talent was never in question, just his timing and marketing appeal. His success outside F1 serves as a reminder that the sport doesn't always identify and promote the best drivers. Roberto Merhi. Roberto Merhi got his Formula One shot with Manor at exactly the wrong time, when the team was struggling to survive financially and technically, turning what should have been his dream opportunity into a nightmare of mechanical failures and political instability that destroyed his reputation before he could establish it. Merhi's junior career had shown flashes of genuine pace, with race wins in competitive series and the kind of consistent performance that usually leads to F1 opportunities. But his timing was catastrophic as he joined a team that was more focused on avoiding bankruptcy than developing competitive race cars. His season at Manor became an exercise in damage limitation rather than career building, with every weekend bringing fresh uncertainty about whether the team would even make it to the next race. The cruel reality is that Merhi never got a fair chance to prove his F1 credentials because he was too busy fighting fires and managing crises to focus on the actual driving. And when Manor finally folded, his brief F1 career became nothing more than a footnote in the sport's history rather than the launching pad for future success. Antonio Félix da Costa. Antonio Félix da Costa was Red Bull's Portuguese prodigy, who got exactly 3 F1 races to prove his worth before being discarded like yesterday's energy drink. Da Costa's junior career progression through Red Bull's development program had been impressive enough to justify F1 promotion, with race wins and consistent performances that demonstrated both speed and racecraft. But his brief stint with Toro Rosso came at a time when the team was more interested in evaluating other prospects than giving him a genuine opportunity to develop. His 3-race audition wasn't enough time to adapt to F1's unique demands or establish any kind of rhythm with the car and team. The irony is that Da Costa went on to prove his worth in Formula E, becoming a race winner and championship contender in that series, while F1 moved on to other drivers who may not have been more talented, but certainly had better timing and political support. André Lotterer. André Lotterer was a 3-time Le Mans winner and endurance racing legend who got one shot at Formula One with Caterham and discovered that being brilliant in sports cars doesn't automatically translate to single-seater success, especially when your F1 debut comes at age 32 in a car that belongs in a museum. Lotterer's endurance racing credentials were impeccable, with victories at Le Mans and championships in various sports car series, proving his ability to handle pressure and deliver results when it mattered. But his single F1 appearance came as a substitute driver for a team that was already struggling to remain competitive. His age and lack of recent single-seater experience meant he was always fighting an uphill battle to adapt to F1's unique demands. His brief F1 cameo serves as a reminder of how the sport's current structure makes it almost impossible for drivers to transition from other categories, regardless of their success or talent level. Will Stevens. Will Stevens spent 2 seasons driving for backmarker teams that treated race weekends like expensive test sessions, where the primary goal was survival rather than competition, which made it impossible for him to demonstrate whether he had the pace to compete at F1's highest level. Stevens' junior career had included podium finishes in GP2 and enough speed to justify F1 consideration, but his opportunities came with teams that were more focused on keeping their cars running than developing competitive pace. His time with Manor and other struggling teams meant he spent more time managing technical problems than actually racing. The tragedy of Stevens' F1 career was that he never got to show his true potential because he was always driving cars that belonged at the back of the grid, making it impossible to evaluate his abilities against meaningful competition or demonstrate the kind of pace that might have earned him opportunities with better teams. His departure from F1 felt inevitable rather than disappointing, the predictable end to a career that had been handicapped from the beginning by poor equipment and limited opportunities. Rio Haryanto. Rio Haryanto carried the hopes of Indonesia's 270 million people into Formula One and discovered that national pride doesn't make cars go faster or provide the kind of financial stability necessary to maintain a seat in the sport's most expensive category. Haryanto's path to F1 had been unconventional but impressive, with success in junior categories and the backing of an entire nation that was desperate to see their first F1 driver compete at the highest level. But his time at Manor was always going to be limited by financial constraints and the team's precarious commercial situation. His performances were respectable given the machinery, but not spectacular enough to overcome the economic realities that govern modern F1. His mid-season departure wasn't really about his driving ability, but rather about money and politics. Sakon Yamamoto. Sakon Yamamoto was Japan's great F1 hope, who got scattered opportunities with struggling teams and never had the chance to establish himself as anything more than a temporary solution. Yamamoto's junior career had shown promise, with race wins in competitive series and the kind of consistent performance that usually leads to stable F1 opportunities. But his F1 chances came with teams that were more interested in his financial backing than his driving ability. The frustration with Yamamoto's career was that he clearly had the ability to compete at F1 level, but the circumstances of his opportunities meant he was always starting from behind and never had the stability to build momentum or demonstrate his true potential. His eventual departure from F1 represented another missed opportunity for both the driver and the sport.